In 1969, at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, outside London, a researcher opened a herbarium folder and took a small sample from a bundle of dried woody stems that had been sitting in that building for more than a century. The stems had been cut on a river in the Brazilian Amazon in 1852 by an English botanist named Richard Spruce. They had never been in good condition. The boat carrying them had been seized for debt on the Rio Negro and its contents confiscated, and by the time the crate reached England, the specimens near the bottom were soaked, mildewed, and in Spruce's own assessment, ruined. He had written the collection off. The sample went into a gas chromatograph and a mass spectrometer, and the machines found an alkaloid still present in the wood. 117 years after a man cut a piece of vine with a machete and lost it to a debt collector, the chemistry was still in there, and it was the same chemistry that had made the plant worth collecting in the first place. The plant is a woody climbing vine. It has no scent worth mentioning, no flower anybody would cross a river for, and it does nothing at all when you take it by itself. And that is the part of this story that has never been satisfactorily explained. The vine does nothing on its own. Neither does the leaf it is boiled with. Out of roughly 80,000 plant species in the Amazon basin, how did anyone ever find the two that only work together? Hold on to that question, because everything else in this video hangs off it, and the answer, when it finally arrives from a place nobody was looking. Start with the man who cut the stems, because he was not looking for this either. Richard Spruce was a Yorkshire schoolmaster's son with no university degree and no money, who went to South America in 1849 and stayed for 15 years. He nearly died of dysentery. He nearly died of malaria. He collected on the Amazon, the Rio Negro, the Orinoco, and up into the Andes, and he shipped thousands of specimens back to England, and part of what he was doing there was industrial espionage on behalf of the British Empire, because one of his assignments was to obtain cinchona, the tree that produces quinine, and get it out of South America so that it could be planted in British colonies. Malaria was the limiting factor on European expansion into the tropics, and quinine was the only thing that worked. So the Englishman on that river was there because a plant had commercial and military value, and in 1851, among the Tucano on the Rio Waupés, he recorded something else. A liana, cut and pounded and boiled, used in a way he tried to describe carefully and mostly failed to. He collected it, named it, and shipped it. The shipment was the one that got seized. That collection is the beginning of the written record in Europe. It is not the beginning of the practice, and one of the things this video is going to do is show you exactly how much older the practice is and how we know. But that comes later, and it comes from an object, not from a document. 7 years after Spruce, in 1858, an Ecuadorian geographer named Manuel Villavicencio published his own account, and there begins a pattern that runs for the next 70 years. Explorer after explorer, naturalist after naturalist, reports a forest vine, gives it a different local name, and provides almost no usable detail. Capi, Yagé, Ayahuasca. For decades, nobody in European science was certain whether these were 3 plants or 1. Meanwhile, something enormous was happening in the same forest, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, and the reason was sitting in a workshop in Massachusetts. In 1839, an American named Charles Goodyear worked out that if you heat natural rubber with sulfur, you get a material that stops going sticky in summer and stops going brittle in winter. Before that, rubber was a novelty that failed in every climate it was sold into. After that, rubber was an industrial material. Then came the bicycle, and then came the motor car, and the entire industrial world discovered simultaneously that it needed an elastic, waterproof, electrically insulating substance in quantities nobody had ever needed before. Tires, hoses, belts, gaskets, wire insulation, boots. Look at whatever vehicle you own. 4 contact patches of vulcanized rubber, each about the size of your hand, are the only thing connecting 2 tons of metal to the road. There is rubber in the wiper blades, in the engine mounts, in the seals around the doors, in the belt driving the alternator. Look at the sole of the shoe you have on right now. In 1900, every gram of that material on Earth came out of a tree, and the trees that mattered most grew wild in the Amazon basin, scattered through the forest, a few per hectare, and they had to be found, tapped, and drained by hand by a human being standing in front of each individual tree. That is the fact that destroyed the western Amazon. Rubber could not be farmed there at scale because the leaf blight that lives in the same forest kills plantation trees when you grow them close together. So it had to be gathered wild, and gathering wild rubber across millions of hectares requires an enormous number of people walking into the forest, and the only people who knew the forest were already living in it. The price of latex went up and up and up. And what happened next in one particular river basin is one of the worst things that has ever been documented in writing. The Putumayo is a tributary system on what is now the border between Colombia and Peru. In the early 1900s, it came under the control of a Peruvian trader named Julio Cesar Arana, who in 1907 registered a company on the London Stock Exchange to hold his operations. It had British directors and British capital and a respectable London address. It was called the Peruvian Amazon Company. What the company was actually doing was this. Indigenous people of the Bora, the Huaytoto, the Andoque, and other nations were made to bring in quotas of rubber. Quotas were enforced by hostage-taking, flogging, mutilation, starvation, and killing. Overseers were brought in from Barbados, men experienced in driving labor on sugar estates, and their statements later became some of the most damning evidence in the case, because they were British subjects, and so the British government had jurisdiction to ask them questions under oath. An American engineer named Walter Hardenberg, who had traveled through the region and seen it, brought the story to London and got it published in a magazine in 1909. The company denied everything. In 1910, a commission went out to look, and on that commission was the British Consul General, an Irishman named Roger Casement, who had already done the same job in the Congo and knew exactly what he was looking at. Casement's report was published by the British government in 1912. The estimates of the dead across the whole period of the Putumayo rubber operations run from around 30,000 to over 40,000 people. The company was liquidated in 1913, which conveniently meant that there was no longer an entity to prosecute. Arana was never punished. He later served as a senator in the Peruvian Congress and died in Lima in 1952 at the age of 88. Casement was hanged by the British government in 1916 for his part in the Irish Rising. That is a story large enough to require its own telling, and it is not this one. And Brazil, in the same decades, was doing a version of the same thing without the London stock listing. Tens of thousands of people from the drought-stricken northeast of the country, from Ceará and Maranhão, were recruited or driven into the Amazon to tap rubber. They arrived owing money for their passage, their tools, their flour, and their kerosene, bought at prices set by the trading post that also bought their rubber. The system was called the Baracão, and it was designed so that the debt grew faster than the rubber could pay it off. A man walked into the forest owing money and stayed there. Now, here is the turn, and it is the single most important thing in this video. Everything about that system was designed to destroy indigenous societies, and in large part of the Western Amazon, it did. But look closely at the mechanics of it, because those camps did something else at the same time, and it was the exact opposite of what they were built for. The rubber camps took people from nations that had never met each other and put them in the same place. They took Huitoto and Bora and Andoque and dozens of smaller groups and mixed them. They took northeastern Brazilians who had never seen a forest and put them next to indigenous men who had lived in one their whole lives. They put Peruvians, Bolivians, and Colombians on the same rivers. They cut trails and ran boats between places that had been 3 weeks apart. An economy built on moving latex out of the forest also moved people and languages and knowledge along the same rivers at the same time. Practices that had been local and specific to particular nations spread outward along the trade routes, moving between peoples who had been thrown together by force. The mixed communities of the rubber frontier are where much of what the outside world now calls Amazonian shamanism was assembled, borrowed, argued over, and recombined. The atrocity was meant to erase these people. What it also did, without intending to, was carry a body of knowledge out of the deep forest and into the river towns, into the hands of anyone who happened to be standing in a rubber camp with them. One of the men standing in a rubber camp was a 22-year-old from Maranhão, and what he did with it changed the direction of this entire story. His name was Raymundo Irineu Serra. He was born in São Vicente Ferrer in Maranhão in December of 1892, the son of Sancho Martinho Serra and Joana de Assunção Serra. His father had been enslaved on a sugar estate. Irineu was an enormous man, close to 2 meters tall, and he was one of the tens of thousands of northeasterners who took a boat west during the rubber cycle looking for work. He reached Sapuri in the newly annexed territory of Acre on the 14th of March, 1912, and there is a story he told about himself from those first days that tells you more than any description of his character could. On arrival at the trading post, the clerk writing up the list of goods he would be issued asked where he was from, and when Irineu said Maranhão, the clerk remarked that every man from Maranhão he had ever met was quick-witted and asked whether he could write. Irineu, not wanting to embarrass his home state, said yes. Then the clerk left, and Irineu, who could not write, went to a friend and asked him for a primer so he could learn the alphabet and make the answer true. He worked the rubber estates around Sapuri for about 2 years, moved to Brasileia near the Bolivian border in 1914, and worked at an estate there. Later, he served in the territorial police force in Rio Branco, and he passed a competitive examination to join the Federal Boundary Commission, the body surveying the frontier between Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, where he was given custody of the expedition's strongbox. That is not a small detail. In 1920's Acre, a black rubber tapper being made responsible for the money of a federal expedition tells you exactly what the men who worked with him thought of him. Somewhere in those years on the frontier, in the mixed world of the rubber camps and the border rivers, he encountered the drink. In 1930, he left the police force, settled in what was then a rural district on the edge of Rio Branco, took up farming, and began holding gatherings publicly. He gave the drink a new name, taken from the Portuguese verb dar, to give, daime. The name of the drink became the name of what he founded, and the church that grew out of those gatherings and its later offshoots are the reason that a practice from the upper Amazon is now legally recognized in Brazil and has congregations on 5 continents. He died in Rio Branco in 1971. I'm going to be careful here, because what a man believed and what he saw are his business and his followers, and this is a channel about materials and where they come from. So take only the part that belongs to this story, which is the part about movement. A practice that had lived among indigenous nations of the upper Amazon, spread and mixed by an economy that was killing them, was carried out of the Seringal by a rubber tapper and put down in a Brazilian city, in Portuguese, in an organized form in 1930. From there, it could travel in a way it never could before. Everything that happens to this plant in the rest of the 20th century, including everything that happens to it in the United States, runs through that. Which brings us back to the question I left in the first minute. Because none of this explains the thing that actually needs explaining. 2 plants. Neither one does anything alone. Together, they do something that made men write reports about them for 170 years. Out of 80,000 species. How? Here is what is actually happening, and it will change how you read the warning label on a prescription bottle. The active compound is in the leaf, not the vine. It is a small molecule, and your body already knows what to do with it because your body encounters molecules in that family constantly and has a dedicated system for taking them apart. That system is an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, and it is sitting in the wall of your gut and in your liver in large quantities, and its job is to break down exactly this class of compound before it can get into your bloodstream. So if you swallow the leaf, nothing happens. Not a reduced effect, nothing. The enzyme dismantles the molecule in the digestive tract, and it never reaches the brain. In chemistry terms, the compound is orally inactive, and that is not a subtlety, it is the whole story. On its own, that leaf is just a leaf. Now the vine. The vine does not contain the active compound at all. What the vine contains is a family of alkaloids, the one spruce's ruined stems still held after 117 years among them, that bind to that enzyme and shut it down temporarily. The vine is not the payload. The vine is the thing that disables the body's defense so that the payload can get through, which means the entire preparation is a two-part system in which each part is useless and the combination is not. And there is no way to discover the combination by trial and error on one plant at a time, because testing either plant alone gives you a null result. You would conclude, correctly, that neither one does anything. And this is not an exotic piece of jungle chemistry. It is the same enzyme and the same mechanism that produced one of the best-known warnings in modern medicine. An older class of antidepressant works by inhibiting monoamine oxidase, and patients taking those drugs are given a list of foods to avoid, because the same enzyme in the gut normally breaks down a compound called tyramine that is present in aged cheese, cured meats, some fermented foods, and certain wines. Block the enzyme, eat the cheese, and blood pressure can spike dangerously. Open your fridge and look at a piece of aged cheese. The reason there is a printed warning about that cheese on a pharmacy label in your country is the same biochemical fact that makes a vine in the Amazon necessary. A gut enzyme, a compound it normally destroys, and what happens when something switches it off. That warning cuts in the other direction too, and it is the one genuinely important safety fact in this entire subject. People on antidepressants and a number of other common medications are in real danger from anything that inhibits that enzyme, and the interaction can be severe. This channel is not going to tell you how any of this is prepared, and that is not squeamishness. It is that the interesting part was never the recipe. The interesting part is that the recipe is chemically impossible to have stumbled into. That is the kind of thing this channel exists to find, and if it is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribing costs you nothing and takes about a second. Because there is an object that answers the question of who solved this and when, and it was dug out of a rock shelter in Bolivia. Before that object, though, there is one more thing that happened to this plant, and it happened in Washington. In 1981, a Californian named Loren Miller, director of a small company called the International Plant Medicine Corporation, took a cutting of the vine out of the Amazon and brought it to the United States. In 1986, on the 17th of June, the United States Patent and Trademark Office granted him patent number 5751 on a variety he called Divine, giving him exclusive rights to reproduce and sell it. American plant patents exist for a real reason. If you spend 20 years breeding a better apple tree, you can protect it the same way you could protect a machine. The requirement is that the plant be new and distinct, and that it not already exist in the public domain. It took about 10 years for indigenous organizations in the Amazon to find out that this had happened. By 1998, Miller had received and ignored repeated requests to surrender the patent. So the coordinating body for indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin, a body based in Ecuador representing more than 400 groups across 8 countries, filed a formal request for re-examination together with American allies, and argued that the plant was neither new nor distinct and had been in cultivation and use across the basin for centuries. Now watch what actually decided it, because this is where the story loops back on itself in a way I did not expect when I started researching it. The Patent Office did not rule on centuries of use. It ruled on paperwork. In the autumn of 1999, it rejected the patent, and the specific basis was that a specimen matching the claimed plant had been sitting on display at the Field Museum in Chicago more than a year before Miller filed his application. A dried plant in a museum in Illinois, catalogued and dated, was the thing that had legal force. 130 years earlier, a shipment of stems had been seized for debt on the Rio Negro, half ruined and stored in a cabinet at Kew, where a machine eventually found the chemistry still sitting in the wood. In 1999, another dried specimen in another cabinet, this time in Chicago, was the evidence that took a patent away from a man in California. The herbarium drawer is not a dead archive. It is a legal instrument, and it turns out to be one of the few kinds of evidence that a patent office will accept about what existed and when. That is not the end of it, and I am not going to skip the ending, because the ending is the part that matters. Miller appealed. The patent office allowed him to submit new evidence and new arguments repeatedly in a way that critics argued departed from its own procedures, and without hearing the other side again reversed itself. On the 26th of January, 2001, the rejection was withdrawn and the patent was reinstated for the remainder of its term. It then ran out on its own in 2003, 17 years after it was issued, and the plant fell into the public domain the way every patent eventually does. So the vine was, for a period of about 17 years, the private property of one man in California, under American law, and the thing that nearly stopped it was a pressed plant in a Chicago museum, and the thing that finally stopped it was the calendar, which leaves the question I've been holding since the first minute. Who worked out the two-plant problem and how long ago? In 2019, a study was published on an object recovered from a rock shelter in the highlands of southwestern Bolivia, a place called the Cueva del Chileno. The object is a bundle. Radiocarbon dating puts it at roughly 1,000 years old, and it is, in the most literal sense, a made thing. The bundle contains a pouch stitched together from the snouts of 3 foxes. There are carved wooden tubes and a small tablet, braided human hair, and woven textile. This is not a natural deposit. It is somebody's kit, assembled, sewn, carried, and stored. The chemical analysis of the interior of that pouch found traces of several compounds. Among them were both of the things this video has been about: the alkaloid family that comes from the vine and the compound that comes from the leaf, together, in the same container. In the Andes, in a region where neither of those plants grows, which means the material had been carried up out of the lowland forest and across a considerable distance to get there. 1,000 years ago, somebody had already solved the problem. Not only solved it, but was carrying both halves of the system together, far from where either of them grows, in a bag they had sewn out of animal hide, wrapped in cloth they had woven. Nobody knows how it was worked out, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because the honest answer is that the knowledge is older than any written record that could tell us. And the people who could have explained it were, in large parts of the Amazon, killed for rubber. What we have is the bag, but notice what the bag is. Everything we can actually prove about the age of this practice, we know from objects: a stitched hide pouch in a Bolivian cave, braided hair, woven cloth, dried stems in a drawer at Kew that survived a debt seizure and a century of neglect and still had their chemistry intact. A pressed specimen in a case in Chicago that a patent office had to accept as fact. The written record of this subject is a mess of contradictory names and unreliable accounts stretching back to 1851. The material record is unambiguous, and it is 1,000 years long, and every piece of it is something a person made with their hands and kept. And the material record does not stop with the pouch. Follow the other end of this story, and you get to the same place. The reason a British botanist was on that river in 1852 was that European empires were looking for plants with industrial value. The reason the Western Amazon was torn open 2 generations later was that an American had learned how to make tree sap survive a summer, and the world had built an entire civilization of tires and belts and hoses and insulation on top of that discovery. The reason a man from Marañón was standing in the forest in 1912, where he encountered the thing that would occupy the rest of his life, was that the rubber estates needed hands. None of the people in this story went into that forest for the vine. They went in for a material. The vine came out because they were there. So the next time somebody tells you that ayahuasca is an ancient Amazonian secret, you can tell them the whole thing instead. That the first specimen to reach Europe was seized for debt, half-rotted, written off as ruined by the man who cut it, and still had its chemistry in it 117 years later. That the vine everybody names the drink after is not the active part at all, but the part that switches off an enzyme in your gut, the same enzyme that puts a warning about aged cheese on a pharmacy label. That neither plant does a thing alone, which is why the discovery cannot have happened by trying one plant at a time. That the industrial demand for rubber killed somewhere between 30 and 40,000 people in one river basin alone, and, in the same motions and entirely against its own intentions, mixed the peoples who carried this knowledge and pushed it out of the deep forest and onto the rivers. That a black rubber tapper from Marañón, the son of an enslaved man, walked out of a rubber estate and founded something in a Brazilian city in 1930 that now exists on 5 continents. That a company in California owned the plant under American law for 17 years. And that the oldest hard proof we have that anyone had ever solved any of it is a bag sewn out of 3 fox snouts, 1,000 years old, found in a cave in Bolivia, hundreds of kilometers from where either plant will grow. Somebody made that bag. Somebody carried it up out of the lowlands. And whoever they were, they already knew the thing that took European chemistry until the 20th century to work out. If that is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to Fabric Myths, because every material in your house has a story like this one sitting underneath it, and we are working through them one at a time. Tell me in the comments which part of this surprised you most, because for most people it comes down to one of 2 things. Either that the plant the drink is named after is not the active ingredient at all, or that the evidence which nearly killed an American patent was a dried specimen sitting in a museum case in Chicago. Tell me where in the world you are watching from, because the map on this channel is stranger than I expected. And tell me which material you want next, because a good share of these videos started as somebody's comment, and if you want the other half of the rubber story, watch our video on nylon. Nylon is what happened when an industrial world that had built itself on a tree decided it could no longer afford to depend on one, and the story of the man who invented it does not end the way you would expect.